Hello and welcome to Strip Panel Naked. I'm Haas and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of my favourite comics. This time we're looking at Jason Aaron and Jason Latour's, the two Jasons, first issue of Southern Bastards to get a look at a masterful way of introducing a new character and a world to an audience, primarily by bringing everything back to a central theme. This is often one of the hardest things to do, and the reason why Southern Bastards works as a great example is it's attempting to tell you a story set in a world that is somewhat down to earth. Somewhat. Okay, so you need to introduce a new world and familiar to most readers. You also need to introduce your main character and set up some kind of drama and intrigue. Aaron and Latour do a version of this in only 3 pages. The first is this lovely splash page. In what will undoubtedly be a recurring theme in these breakdowns, subtlety is key. Look at all the detail you're getting here right off the bat. Empty bottles and crushed cans, a scraggy dog, one that looks worse for wear, taking a dump. Then in the background, and again this is something that Latour does quite a lot in this comic, you've got 3 signs for different churches. We're starting to understand what kind of place we might be about to enter. And if that wasn't enough, look at the wording for this sign. Hell, one way in, no way out, welcome. If that isn't a clear indication of what's about to happen in this comic book, then I don't know what else these guys can do to tell you. And not to spoil it, but that's a very beautiful way of explaining this entire first story arc in one sign in the background of the first panel of the comic book. Okay, so page 2. The dog turns and we have the 3 days speech bubble and a truck heading towards us. The dog in the frame is large and mostly silhouetted, giving it this kind of fierce, unwelcoming look. We can tell where this is going, and that little growl, you see that? It's not even actual words, it's just this kind of squiggle that just creates this idea of noise. We can tell where this is going. 3 days lets us know we've got a deadline. This is always a very simple way of upping the ante in any situation. So panel 2, the dog barks. The arc sound effect to me feels a little pathetic. The fact that we've gone wider on the dog seems to take the attention away from it a little bit, again on purpose. You could almost be fooled into thinking the dog dumping was just a simple way of showing how crude or crass this place is, but we'll see why he's doing it on the next page. And there's a sign. Keep Alabama beautiful, no dumping. This sign was right in front of where the dog was doing his business and all those old beer bottles were. A subtle, nice way of showing you there's 2 sides to everything you're gonna see here. It's all tying in without knocking you over the head with these ideas. Keep it beautiful, but even the folk here already are trashing it. And also you've got the yawl haul truck. Someone's moving out. Interestingly again about the framing of this is that everything we've seen so far has been all from the same position. It's all been from just inside the 2 sets of signs we've seen, the church signs and this Welcome to Alabama sign. It's almost as though someone is stood watching this go past. And interestingly enough, they don't want to enter Alabama themselves, because on the next panels, we move inside the truck with Earl Tubb. He's our main character. But what we don't get here really is a chance to properly see him. So on these first 2 panels here, we've got a close-up on his hand and a wing mirror. Wing mirrors are used for seeing backwards, right? I think there's a reason we're seeing that in the frame. Everything here is positioned backwards. We're always behind Earl. On the next panel you can see, again, we're sort of behind him, and as we move down to the 3rd panel with Earl in it, we've got this entirely silhouetted shot, so even here we can't quite see him, and we're a little bit behind if you'll notice. I think the silhouette is important to note as well, that Earl is very unclear. He's a mysterious entity still. And then we've got the classic horror trope, he's lost his phone signal, we've left civilization. Welcome to the middle of nowhere, I reckon, for me is the only failing of this early bit of the story. For the subtlety of the rest, it might be a little bit on the nose, but I think we can forgive him that. So then we go to page 3. The dog's barking again, but there's the sign of Welcome to Crawl County, and it tells you a little bit about the football club. We're getting a sense of where this place is based on the imagery, you can see that on the sign. But look at panel 2, and that's the really interesting part. It's huge, suddenly drenched in red. The dog looks maniacal now. The arcs have gone from these little yellow lines to practically being splashed in blood, and the dog is covered in scars. Its teeth are big and yellow. It looks dangerous. Latour and Aaron are telling us that things are not what they seem. Turn your back on someone here, and it can be brutal. Everything has got 2 sides. That is a huge part of the theme of this story, and one they've established already in only 3 pages and a handful of panels. Take a look at a few more things throughout the issue, as I believe they've set the scene of the story really well here. The next part is about the main character, Earl Tubb. Throughout the first few issues of Southern Bastards, it's kind of made apparent that Earl is this big, stocky, tough guy, but what issue 1 does is try and tell you the opposite, that actually he pales in comparison to someone else. Take a look at page 4. We still don't see Earl. In fact, on the final panel, he's practically pushed off the frame in favour of the Boss Barbecue location and townsfolk. If you needed even more indication he doesn't fit in, here it is. And just while we're here, because it's so good, it's worth noting, Look how much detail Latour is putting into every single frame in this comic. You've got the imagery here of the statues that represents the Civil War era, and the fact that they're praising that tells you something immediately about this place. Like, you're getting so much from just this single panel here. Behind Earl's your haul, is a pickup truck. Again, the only other car you see. It gives you a sense of where we are. Panel 3 has this homecoming banner. Very simple, but very effective. So let's look at the next page. Earl gets home and we finally get to see him. He looks defeated in this rendering, not what we would assume to be our typical hero. He's got a bit of a pot belly, his shoulders are sagging, he's looking down and he's covered in shadow. He's drawn also at eye level, and eye level rendering allows us to have the same viewpoint as the character. It means we don't instinctively judge him as big or tall, as right or wrong. Very neutral, and it's a nice way of getting us literally on Earl's level. We have a shadow that Earl is casting on his dad's grave on the next panel, which is calling ahead to the end of the issue, and we'll get to that later. But the next panel has a shadow being cast on Earl, and that's by the tree that's growing out of his dad's grave. He is currently, literally and figuratively, standing under his dad's shadow. Notice too, because this will also feed back into the ending, that Earl is framed separately from his dad's tombstone in every case. Anytime we can see the writing on his dad's tombstone, Earl is not in that same panel. Unless, like this panel here, it's really just for positioning context, which is a classic idea from cinema. Powerful people get their own framing, and when people join together, then we'll put them together in the same frame. He hasn't earned that yet. So we drop down for a low angle on the final frame flashback. Again, this is steeped in red. It feels less placid than these previous panels, which are actually rendered in this kind of muted tone. You know, it's like muted red, muted greys. Turning the page gives us this double splash. Look at that angle on Earl's dad. Eyeline from Earl again putting us in his position at a low angle. But look how big and powerful his dad looks there. He's framed within the doorway and is basically the whole frame. Look how small those other two silhouettes look in comparison. And then look right, obviously you've already seen it, but to the tree that's grown out of his dad's grave. It's huge. It's bigger than Earl. So big Earl has to practically lean over to see it all. And so big it takes up a whole 2 pages. You have to layer panels over the tree, it takes up so much space. Earl looks tiny here, less of a man, and this tree covers him in shadow. For these 2 panels, we go eyeline again, an eyeline on his father. I think it's worth noting in both shots of the gravestone, we haven't looked down at it from Earl's point of view. It's mostly been at eye level, if a gravestone can have an eye. There's a lot of this with Earl's father. Look at this panel from the next page. He's so big he doesn't even fit his upper chest into the frame. It's just this idea of a man that we're being presented with, which again is a huge part of the theme of this story. What makes a man? But then this reverses towards the end of the comic. Here, Earl has decided to cut down the tree growing out of his dad's grave. Now, Latour draws him at a lower angle, indicating that because he's actually deciding to do something, to take an action, he's more imposing. So then we turn to this page. Again, this is reflecting thematically on what happens with his father in the past. It also mirrors the opening of the comic in that we have these kind of neutral panels with grey and blue intercut with the red violent imagery. It's not just the townsfolk from here and the dog that have these dark sides. So does Earl, and now we get to see it. I don't think it's any coincidence either that we end this page with images of 2 sets of teeth. One of the dog barking, again from the start of the comic, and one of Earl's, also yellow teeth, with this chock noise over the top of it, which is reminiscent to the arcs that we were getting back with the dog on the first page. Parallels being drawn here between the dog and Earl. Thematically, what they're saying is the dog and Earl are the same. The dog, an outsider seemingly in this town, kicked around, battle-scarred, battle-hardened, can turn nasty when he needs to. Here, Earl is being portrayed the exact same way. For the final page of the comic, Earl is finally framed together with his dad's gravestone for the very first time, at eye level and bigger than it is. He's taken up the mantle here. Look at the writing on Bertrand Tubbs' headstone. Here was a man. Earlier that meant something different. A man was here, not anymore. But now it's changed into something else. He was here, now it's Earl's turn. So what we have here is imagery and framing, steeped in theme, drenched in it practically. All these parts, from the colouring, the angles, the framing, the amount of detail in the background, it's all pushing this idea of something nasty about to occur and allowing us to understand where, contextually, it's all happening. If you took all of this out and just tried to tell what in essence in Southern Bastards is actually quite a relatively standard revenge tale, it wouldn't be the genre elevating story it is. It'd be another B-movie type comic that we'd move on from pretty quick, but Aaron and Latour are much, much, much better than that. It's obvious, you can see in every page of this comic. Here, Aaron and Latour, they give us something more. Something ultimately far more human than just that. They give us a real, breathing world that you can see existing beyond the boundaries of the panels. And importantly, they give us a man. Thanks for watching.